Well, good morning, Doxology. It is so great to worship with you guys this morning. Hey, grab a Bible if you've got one handy and start making your way to 1 Kings chapter 1. 1 Kings chapter 1 today. And a special hello to those of you that are preparing for your very first community group this week as part of a brand new series. Hey, it is a weird time to join or to host a group, but I'm still confident this is an investment that you are not going to regret making. I'm so glad you're here and there as a part of it. And there's still time, if you haven't already, to jump in. We are starting a brand new series this morning where we're going to look at the life of a man who, in some ways, all of us would like to be like, but in other ways, who none of us want to imitate. Solomon's described as the wisest man who ever lived, a Renaissance man who caught the American dream 3,000 years before it was a thing. He made a fortune, was internationally famous, had a reputation as an incredible decision maker, was the smartest guy in every room he walked into. Chick flick actors wanted to be as smooth as him when they grew up. And yet, despite having more than he ever asked for, he ends up with far less than any of us hope for. At the end of a story, we're left wondering exactly what kind of story this is. It's part victory and part tragedy, part wisdom for living, part cautionary tale. It's like a lot of our stories. It's complicated, which makes it the perfect story to look at because it shows us a man who navigated the world we live in and the world we dream of, and shows us a future that some of us fear the most, so that those of us who have a God-sized dream for our lives can learn some lessons from someone who traveled the road long before us. I read an article not long ago about the Millennium Tower in San Francisco. Are you familiar with this? The largest skyscraper in San Francisco, at least 15 years ago when it was built, filled with $8, $9, and $10 million condominiums where the rich and the famous could live a life of luxury and convenience together around other rich, powerful people. And sure enough, big name people like Joe Montana and Hunter Pence and Tom Perkins all bought a piece of the dream and moved in. But after just a few months, the dream started to show cracks, literally. The building, it turned out, was sinking and leaning, crashing in slow motion, it seemed. And everyone wondered what would happen when, not if, when, San Francisco experienced its next earthquake. Engineers were called in right after the lawyers were called in. And after an investigation, they determined what you may already know. Much of San Francisco, turns out, is built over a landfill. Now, everyone knows in San Francisco, when you build, whatever you build, you have to drill down through the fill dirt and the landfill all the way to bedrock. The builders of the Millennium Tower, it turns out, didn't do that. In an effort to save time and money, they stopped the piers short. The building was built near bedrock, but not in bedrock. The hopes, the dreams, and the lives, and the resources of the people who lived in the Millennium Tower were literally anchored in garbage. And it ended up costing everyone involved far more than they ever imagined. And it could have been even worse. It's a perfect picture of Solomon's life. A life of luxury and influence and prestige and power and extravagant blessing that rose higher than anyone around him, but over time began to sink and lean and ultimately collapse, taking out Solomon's hopes and dreams and costing him and the people that he loved far more than they ever could have imagined. And to make matters worse, it was all predictable and completely avoidable right from the very beginning. And that's what I want to show you this morning. Before Solomon's throne even has a chance to get warm, he gets an upfront look at three leaders who sink and lean and crash, whose piers are drilled into the same three things that Solomon will be tempted to anchor his life in all the way along. and that you and I are too. We'll see the cracks and the crash of their lives and hear a warning from a man who lived through a crash of his own about a better place to build. In fact, we see him first. Look at 1 Kings chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. But I'll warn you, it's a weird way to start the story. 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 1. When King David was very old, he couldn't keep warm, even when they put covers over him. So his attendants said to him, "Let's look for a young virgin to serve the king and take care of him. She can lie beside him so that our lord the king can keep warm." Then they searched throughout Israel for a beautiful young woman and found Abishag, a Shunammite, and brought her the king. The woman was very beautiful. She took care of the king and waited on him. But the king had no sexual relations with her. This is David, the great king who defeated Goliath and fought off a lion and is now shivering under a blanket. He can't even keep himself warm. So his attendants do something that seems really strange to us, even totally unacceptable to us. But it was a common documented medical practice in those days. See, physicians believed that the close proximity of young life and breath and energy could restore health and breath and energy to an old life, sort of by osmosis. And this raises all kinds of really good questions for us about what they did. But the writer wants to make absolutely sure it doesn't raise at least one question about what David did, especially if you know his story. The man who hadn't been able to control himself when he saw beautiful Bathsheba from a distance earlier in his life, here is able to control himself with a beautiful woman lying right next to him in bed. See, at the end of his life, David is physically weak, but incredibly strong, all at the same time. And the writer wants you to notice that because you're about to see 4 stories, including the story of David's son, that are headed in the opposite direction. You see the very first one, beginning in the very next verse. 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 5. Now, Adonijah, whose mother was Haggith, put himself forward and said, "I will be king." So he got his chariots and horses ready, with 50 men to run ahead of him. His father, David, had never rebuked him by asking, "Why do you behave as you do?" He was also very handsome and was born next, after Absalom. So Adonijah sees his father's increasing weakness, decides to put together an exploratory committee, invites him to a top-secret barbecue where he puts himself forward as king. But he pretty intentionally leaves a few people off the invitation list. He doesn't invite Zadok, the high priest. He doesn't consult with Nathan, his dad's closest advisor, and he doesn't invite Solomon. So if you're taking notes here on the signs of a faulty foundation, write down the words unrestrained ambition. Unrestrained ambition. It's emphatic here when we read it from Adonijah's own mouth. He says, "I will be king." But the writer makes sure we know it's not just ambition that's the problem. It's ambition without any kind of restraint. In fact, the writer says he never learned restraint from his father. That's a tragedy that rests on David's shoulders. But Adonijah, he didn't invite restraint from anywhere else either. And that's on him. In fact, he takes this plan and his ambition and his goal and he surrounds himself with people he knows won't restrain him, hoping to build a big enough coalition that before long, nothing can restrain him. He's deliberately choosing to go high without anything that anchors him deep. And it's going to destroy him. As the story goes on, word gets back to one of David's advisors who goes to Bathsheba, goes into David and says, "You need to be aware of what is happening here. See, God promised to establish Solomon's throne, But Adonijah's in picking out curtains for the throne room as we speak. So David moves to action. He's still the king. Last half of chapter 1, he puts Solomon on his mule, the equivalent of a presidential motorcade. He calls together the high priest and the national security advisors, and they hold a public ceremony. They blow a loud trumpet, and they walk Solomon in broad daylight straight to the throne, where he sits down at the head of the parade, which is so loud by that point that Adonijah's secret society meeting that's just a mile away is interrupted. When they start to see what's happening one by one, his advisors have to leave to take an emergency phone call, and they never come back. Adonijah's disgraced and alone, and he begs Solomon to show him grace, and Solomon does. But instead of living from there out of gratitude, in the very next chapter, Adonijah goes to Solomon's mom and says essentially, I'm willing to concede the throne, but I'm going to need a little parting gift to go away quietly. That beautiful girl who's keeping Dad warm, I want her to come with me, which is wrong on several levels. He's essentially saying to his dad, you can die old and cold for all I care. It's a sin against the woman, for sure. But Solomon also recognizes it's a last-ditch effort to steal the throne. Adonijah's trying to win the throne in the tabloids by showing up in public with the woman who'd been closest to the king. It's an act of high treason against David and against Solomon, and it all comes crashing down on Adonijah. That's Adonijah's story. It's a life of unrestrained ambition. And honestly, it's not just the story of Adonijah. It's going to be the story of Solomon too. But it didn't have to be. And frankly, it's going to be some of our stories as well. But hear this. It doesn't have to be. It's one thing to have ambition. It's one thing to have a God-sized dream for your life. In fact, I hope you have a God-sized dream for your life. But if we choose to build without restraint, if we're not willing to invite contrary opinions, to pursue our ambitions out in the open in the light of day, it may be a sign we're building on shaky ground. In my life, I call it the star telegram test. If I'm in the middle of a decision, chasing my aspirations, and I realized I wouldn't be comfortable with the truth about what I'm doing being written about in a newspaper, it's a pretty good indication I'm doing something I'm about to regret. And the simplest time to make that kind of adjustment, it was before I got started. But the second simplest time is today. To bring in some perspective, to bring my ambition into the light so that I can build my ambition on a better foundation. The second person that Solomon has to deal with is a guy named Joab. Joab was one of David's closest advisors and military leaders for a really long time, but he had a secret that he didn't think anybody knew about. Look down what Solomon pronounces about Joab. 1 Kings chapter 3, beginning in verse 32. 1 Kings chapter 2, beginning in verse 32. Solomon says, the Lord will repay him for the blood he shed, because without my father David knowing, he attacked 2 men and killed them with the sword. Both of them, Abner, son of Ner, commander of Israel's army, and Amasa, son of Jether, commander of Judah's army, were better men and more upright than he. May the guilt of their blood rest on the head of Joab and his descendants forever. But on David and his descendants, his house and his throne, may there be the Lord's peace forever. Okay, so here's the story. Abner and Amasa were guys who had been co-leaders with Joab. Joab and Abner had kind of a locker room rivalry. They came up with this game for their troops. Both of them agreed on it, and they picked their teams. But Joab's side lost, and it cost him his brother, humiliated him in front of the guys, and it won favor for Abner with David. So Joab asked for a confidential conversation with Abner, pulled him into a private room, and murdered him in cold blood, and then walked away, thinking he'd gotten away with it. Amasa had a similar story. He got a promotion that Joab felt like he deserved. And over the years, Joab harbored and nursed bitterness until just the right moment. The two of them reconnected on down the road when they both found themselves pursuing the same enemy. And as they approached each other to say hello, Joab's dagger fell out of its sheath, and he realized Amasa hadn't seen it. So as he picked it up, he ran it through Amasa and left him wallowing in the middle of the road, and then turned to his troops and said, "Bummer, I guess you guys are with me now." And now here we are, 1 Kings chapter 2, and Joab reemerges from the shadows. He gambles on which son would be king, and he gambles wrong. And he finds out that his secrets had been found out. Joab's a man who Solomon has to deal with because of the second big thing that can take out a person with a God-sized dream that you may not have thought of. It's this, right? Unchecked anger. Unchecked anger. Unchecked anger, it's like acid on the soul. I'm not recommending the show, but there's a perfect illustration of this in the TV show Breaking Bad. Now, those of you that are Breaking Bad fans already know the moment I'm talking about. Those of you who aren't Breaking Bad fans but watched a couple of episodes, you remember the moment that you said, "I'm out"? That's what unchecked anger does. If you're not up on the show, the star of the show attempts to dispose of one of his enemies in an upstairs bathtub using hydrofluoric acid. I won't describe it except to say it all comes crashing down. And it's disturbing, disgusting, revolting, and exactly what happens to the foundation of a person who can't figure out a way to check their anger. Some of you have experienced this in your own life, or the collateral damage of it from someone else's life. And all of us who have would tell all of us who will, the moment you begin to see those cracks of resentment appear, where you begin plotting and imagining and rehearsing the demise of another person, that's the moment to call in some foundation experts. Depending on what kind of anger, what kind of hurt it is, maybe it's time to call a counselor, or time to open up to a Christ-centered, wise, trusted friend who can help you keep anger and resentment from eating away at your soul. Learn the lesson from Joab, the beginning of Solomon's life, while there's still time to work on the foundation before the earthquakes come. The last one for today is a guy named Shimei. Shimei is a guy who's actually an incredible story of forgiveness left over from David's story. During one of David's most difficult seasons of leadership, Shimei is a guy who stood right by the side of the road and threw rocks at David and cursed him and spread all kinds of conspiracy stories about David that weren't even remotely true. And yet, instead of killing him, David protected him and provided for him for the rest of David's life. But in his final words to Solomon, he gave Solomon a strategy for dealing with Shimei. He said, "Forgive him, but don't ever trust him again." So Solomon tells Shimei, look at 1 Kings chapter 2. 1 Kings chapter 2, beginning in verse 36. The king sent for Shimei and says to him, "Build yourself a house in Jerusalem and live there, but do not go anywhere else. The day you leave and cross the Kidron Valley, you can be sure you will die. Your blood will be on your own head." Shimei answered the king, "What you say is good. Your servant will do as my lord the king has said." And Shimei stayed in Jerusalem for a long time. But 3 years later, 2 of Shimei's slaves ran off to Achish, son of Maacah, king of Gath. And Shimei was told, "Your slaves are at Gath." At this, he saddled his donkey and went to Achish at Gath in search of his slaves. So Shimei went away and brought the slaves back from Gath. Write down unquenched abundance. Unquenched abundance. Shimei begins on his feet on the street, throwing rocks and hurling curses at David. David protects him, provides for him, to the point that now he lives near the king and even has servants and transportation and the means to build a house, grace upon grace, and no foundation to hold it, right? He loses just a little bit of that abundance. 2 of his slaves run away. And rather than be content and cut his losses, decides to push the boundaries, hoping nobody will notice, or that they will have forgotten the promise that he made. He literally cuts the corner on a boundary he'd agreed to keep in order to keep from losing even some of the abundance that he hadn't deserved to begin with. I heard a story this week about two guys that found themselves at an exclusive party on a private island where they were surrounded by the rich and the famous and the powerful. One of them pointed to the host of the party and said to his friend, "How's it feel to know that that guy made more money yesterday than you'll make added up over the course of your entire life?" His friend thought for a second and then responded, "You know, that's true, but I have one thing he will never possess." The guy said, "What's that?" His friend said, "Enough." That's a secret Shimei hadn't learned. Solomon didn't learn, that you and I have to learn. Look, it's no sin to be blessed with abundance. Relative to much of the rest of the world, all of us fall into that category, don't we? But one of the reasons none of us feel like we fit in that category is that we don't have the one thing this wise friend realized the host of that dinner would never have: enough. And worse, we don't have any idea what it would look like if we had enough. So the answer to how much we need always turns out to be just a little more than I have. I know a guy I won't name because he loves to do this in secret. He decided with his family that they were going to figure out what the number of enough was and cap their standard of living there. And if they ever made more than enough, they were going to give it all away. I'm not saying you ought to do that, but I'm not saying you shouldn't either. However we handle abundance, we have to learn to live within limits, to realize that the grace we've already received will always outweigh the extra we can grab, and to stay in bounds as we pursue it, however small or outdated the boundaries seem to be to us. The last thing I want you to see is the positive example. You've got 3 pitfalls to avoid, but David gives Solomon one thing to pursue. Look what he says, 1 Kings chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. 1 Kings chapter 2, beginning in verse 1, "When the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon his son. 'I'm about to go the way of all the earth,' he said. 'So be strong. Act like a man.'" Okay, what does it look like to act like a man? Well, it's not about conquests. It's not about hunting and fishing and grunting and stinking and power or any of those things. Here's what the great warrior King David teaches his son. Verse 3. "Observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations, as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go." David tells Solomon and tells us, fix your foundation on faithfulness. How do I do that? Well, we're going to get several looks at how and how not to do this, specifically over the course of Solomon's life. But notice how David says it here. He says, observe what God requires. Observing something means more than just being aware of something. It means paying attention to it. That's what Adonijah was unwilling to do. He refused to pay any attention to tension when it came to his aspiration. He was aware of it, but he didn't observe it. He literally didn't invite it to the party. But David says, observe the kind of foundation that's required for a life that God desires to bless. And then walk. Walk in obedience to him. That's what Joab ignored. Joab walked in obedience to God as long as God was walking in obedience to Joab. But when God didn't do what Joab wanted, when Joab wanted it, the way Joab wanted it done, Joab walked away. Observe, walk, and finally, keep. A solid foundation of grace upon grace is worthless if you're not willing to build your whole life on it. That's what you learn from Shimei, who experienced blessing and grace and provision and promise, and he built his life there until one day when he allowed himself to forget. See, here's the problem. When someone new comes to your house, they ever ask for a tour, they'll never ask to see your foundation. Even tours of architectural masterpieces almost never include a look at the slab or the piers. They're not interesting. In most cases, they wouldn't be visible anyway. The only person who really ever pays attention to what lies beneath the surface is the designer and the person in whose hands the dream is placed. I've never met a builder who regretted a foundation that was too strong. Never met a person who looked back on their life and found they had too strong a base for their blessings. What is God's dream for your life from here? You can't possibly know the multifaceted blessing that He wants to place in your hands. That's not on you to know for now. Solomon didn't have a clue how high to dream or how much the blessings would weigh. But what you can settle for sure, at least from here, is that whatever they weigh, they will rest on a foundation that can hold them. And the best day to start, or start again, is today. Would you bow your head with me? The first invitation from David to Solomon was to observe. And maybe before anything else, that's the opportunity before you today, to really push pause and pay attention to attention in the ambition of your life. Maybe it's time to talk it over with someone, to invite some perspective, to bring someone else in the loop who can help you answer the question, does my direction match my dreams in the places that matter the most? Is my foundation strong enough for my ambition? And then, what steps do I need to take from here? That's the second piece, and maybe a response for you today, to walk it out, to take a single step of obedience that sets you up for the next step. Maybe it's the very first step, to realize that God sent His Son Jesus for this express purpose, to take the cracks and seal them, to take a crash and restore you and rebuild you and raise you to new life and hope, and He offers it all as a gift. That's the very first step in a life connected with God. And if you haven't already taken it, I'd invite you to take it today, right where you sit, to tell Him you're trusting Him. You're trusting that Jesus died for you and rose from the dead to forgive you and rescue you and restore you. For some of us, the step today is a keep step. We realize we've wandered, we've forgotten. We experienced grace, but we've wandered away. And it's time to come back to the foundation. And some of you feel like maybe it's too late. You're living in the rubble. Don't forget how this story starts with David the king, after a crash, at the very end of his life, physically weak and stronger than ever. Today is not too late for you either to begin finishing well. Lord, for all of us, would you give us a foundation that's strong enough to support your vision for our life and to hold the blessings that you long to lavish on us. Whenever you bring them, whatever they weigh, find us faithful, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more, check out our channel or our most recent video. Also, if you enjoyed the message today, give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.